quite impressed. We have three ladies in red saris, and I'm supposed to have a red sari. I should have borrowed Kavita's, I said. I have a peach one. It would have been a good match. Okay, it's 10:02, and I thought this is a good time that we have our scientists who are interested in this area of research, and of course our audience from outside Ikrusat Patancheru. They are in Western Central Africa, most probably Niger and Mali, as well as Eastern Southern Africa. And of course, I know that there are folks right there in the US who are staying extra hours at night to be able to view this. And I'm sure that Lisa Fleming is also there. Okay, let me introduce a bit of our special presentation today. Precious Listana is one of our interns for this summer, and the youngest one. And I view that even before I accepted her as an intern, I made sure that I screen her very thoroughly, just like all others. And in the screening process, I viewed her blogs and her YouTube presentations. And it's in one of the YouTube presentation where I think she practiced 100 times that impressed me so much. And so I said, there's no doubt that even as a high school graduate, Precious will be able to address the various issues in her Young Minds research, but also the challenges of going to the villages. So I would say that take note of the two keywords that she will be highlighting in her presentation. Her interest on gender equality and her interest in microfinance. And that's the reason why she integrated and have a mindset of how this is actually undertaken in practical purposes. And one of the things that I was wondering about is her interest in the qualitative aspects of work, while she will actually be undertaking her bachelor's in the University of California at Berkeley in highly mathematical area. She will be doing her bachelor's in applied mathematics. So initially, I was prepared to give her one of my components of my project, which is all equations. I showed her what's in my blackboard, but when she came here, she said, I want to do this, which is in the area which is very close to her heart. So with the help of her co-advisors, that is Padma and Kavita, we had a discussion that she will really learn a lot from her experience here by going to the villages and undertaking an immersion that will let her understand the village life and to understand the aspects of gender equality and microfinance through a deeper understanding of how women desiring to be empowered, desiring to have that power through a contribution in the income in the families through self-help groups have emerged. So before I do that, I would like to say a little bit more about Precious. I'm very proud that she's from the Philippines. She gained like 5+ points for that. And more points on the fact that she is an awardee, this year's awardee of the World Food Prize Borlaug Ruan Internship Award. It's a very prestigious one that only a few in the entire United States gets. And what more is the fact that she also garnered the Gates Millennium Scholarship, which assured her of her University of California at Berkeley funding, but also a great potential that this support will extend until she finishes her PhD. So that is a really great thing for her. And with the great support of the VDSA project and the great support of the VDSA team, primarily that of Padma, Kavita, and the two special ladies, Pallavi and Swati, who gave her the interpretation in Telugu. She was telling us how the interpretation, they did their interpretation as much as possible but she thought she has to learn Telugu to really grasp the full set. Now, it's impressive that during her first, having uh, gotten familiar with her through her presentations in YouTube, I said maybe this will be one of the interns whom I will now start. Before I had interns who I have to give step-by-step procedures, step 1 to step 10. But she is one who I would say I'm quite confident that as soon as she lands here, she'll be able to do things. So I think I shocked her during our first meeting. I said, have you read in your preparation the Walker and Ryan book? She said, no. I said, so your first assignment is to finish this in a week and give me your analysis and synthesis of this on Friday. That was a Monday meeting. And then I said, in addition to that, have you read this, which is a Dokur profile, which is written, where's Nagasharal? Nagasharal, where are you? Okay, Nagasharal is missing. Nagasharal wrote this together with me, and this is the model profile, and I said, this is an additional assignment. And there's more. I said, you've chosen self-help groups. There are thousands of articles on self-help groups. Go through that and make a synthesis. Indeed, she did that. And I said, in addition, there are more papers like this on changes in VDSA. I gave her a lot of readings. And then I'm sure that in the process of discussions, Padma and Kavita also gave her a lot more. But it's quite astonishing that during that first week, we already planned her immersion in the villages. She went to the village at one-day reconnaissance on the markets, and then came back to the campus, developed her questionnaire, and I said, do you have the methodology for properly doing this questionnaire and properly undertaking self-help group? She said, no. And I said, okay, you go back. There is a proper procedure, tools and methods on undertaking self-help groups. And I said, you just don't go there and talk to people. There is a methodology, including the sampling scheme. You have to know that and undertake that and follow the rules on the best practices of undertaking self-help groups. Quickly, she went. I didn't even give her the publication. She went and she came back. Is this the publication that you wanted to read? I said, yes, it's the Sega Sage publication. And she went. And after, in preparation for that, I said she's done it properly because she followed the tools as well as the best practices. And you will now see the process in which she has understood the process of formation of self-help groups, whereby women aspiring to be empowered, that progression which has happened in a village and has happened in many villages in India, has actually established a very basic instrument right now the Indian government and many developing countries are using to empower women. So there you are. I promised a very good introduction for you. So I prepared that last night. So we now have Precious Listana for her presentation on the process of formation of successful self-help groups. Precious.
Thank you for that wonderful introduction, Dr. Bantilan. So first of all, good morning to all of you and to all those that are watching, evening or afternoon. And again, my name is Precious Listana. I am a Borlaug Ruin intern, and my project is the process of forming successful self-help groups in the semi-arid tropic village of Dokur. But before I begin, I want you all to keep in mind that this is a qualitative report, not quantitative. All right, so let's get started. The outline of this seminar consists of 7 things, starting with a background information, an overview of my project, literature review, as Dr. Bantilan showed those books that I've read, the methodology, results, further research, and questions. But before I begin, I have some few people that I want to extend my gratitude to. Dr. Bantilan, thank you so much for agreeing to be my supervisor and, as you mentioned, looking me up online and being impressed with what I've done. The whole MIP department for having their doors open for me. Padmaja and Kavita for showing me the true meaning behind the numbers behind all of this data. Pallavi and Swati, who's not just been my translators, but also my wonderful friends the World Food Prize, especially Lisa Fleming, who's watching right now, for giving me this opportunity and to have this 2-month internship here in ECRSAT. My family and parents for always checking up on me, not forgetting to call me, and motivating me to keep on going with this project. And last but not least, my teachers back at home, Miss Kavas and Miss Bash, who's given me undeniable amount of support for making this whole thing possible, and my friends back home, and the ones that I've made here. All of you have given me a lot of life lessons that I'm surely going to take in the future. So thank you for all of that. So now, what exactly is the main reason for why I chose to do a study on self-help groups? As Dr. Bantilan mentioned, my two interests are microfinance and gender equality. This photo right here shows myself and four other young ladies presenting a TED Talk in my school regarding the empowerment and raising awareness on microfinance. And this is a paper I wrote for the World Food Prize, which specifically states how gender inequality prevents food security in Somalia. And this paper served as my foundation for my interest in gender equality. And throughout this entire presentation, I want all of you to think of two main quotes that resonate in my entire seminar. The first one is by Muhammad Yunus. If we are looking for one single action which will enable the poor to overcome their poverty, I would focus on credit. This one is by Melaine Verveer, the co-founder of Seneca Women. When women progress, we all progress. Men and women, boys and girls. No country can get ahead if it leaves half of its people behind. So again, think of these two quotes as the resonating foundation for my entire seminar. So quick project overview. An important thing to keep in mind is that there are so many available research on the self-help group impacts specifically by these organizations. And because there are already so many research regarding the impacts of self-help groups, I was thinking, why not figure out the factors that constitute successful groups? Because if you figure those out, then you're able to empower more women to be able to have access to those impacts that are explained elaborately on these research. And to achieve that goal and purpose, I came up with 4 objectives. The first one is the reason why you're all here, to examine the process of forming successful groups. The second one is to analyze the effects of environmental, social, cultural, economic problems in the creation and maintenance of self-help groups. The third one is to differentiate between successful and failed groups regarding the evaluation of their personal leadership and group dynamics. And last but not least, just looking at how women are exposed and empowered through these groups. So these are the 4 main objectives that I'm going to fully elaborate in this report. But before I begin on that, let me just talk about some limitations. I had 3 limitations: time, language, and experience. Since I only had a 2-month internship, I was not fully able to analyze the VDSA data from ECRSAT, nor interview other groups from other villages to compare my data. And even though in my report I wasn't able to also create policy and recommendations, I hope that this seminar will be able to spark some interest regarding self-help groups and make people more aware of the impacts and how to form these groups. As for language, again, even though I had amazing translators, a lot of the words were lost in translation, but that didn't stop me from carrying this report. And as Dr. Bantilan mentioned, I am a recent high school graduate, so my experience is not the best. I'm not a PhD student or a grad student, so I did not know a lot about semi-arid tropics or self-help groups. Actually, I didn't really know what those were when I came in here. But now I'm confident to say that I know a great deal amount of what those two things are. As for my literature review, I read this 384-page book from front to back, and it was a very comprehensive book if any of you have read it. There's a limited copy, as I've heard, so you should get your hands on that. But other than that, this book, I'm actually really glad I read it because it gave me a comprehension of what the semi-arid tropics really entailed and what the whole VDSA data is. And I also read this village profile book written by Nagashwara, Babu, and Dr. Bantilan. and this gave me a better understanding of the demographics of Dokur. And in order to gain more experience or more knowledge regarding self-help groups, I read a bunch of intern reports, and that taught me how to format my report and the structure of my seminar. And last but not least, I also read a lot of quantitative reports regarding the status of microfinance, specifically of self-help groups led by NABARD, just to compare my data from a village aspect to a countrywide level aspect. So now I'm going to elaborate about the village that I chose to have my field visit. And where exactly is Dokur? Well, it is roughly 5 kilometers away from the Devarkaja Mandal and about 125 kilometers away from Hyderabad. But if we look at a map, we can see that Dokur is very close to Devarkaja. Therefore, a lot of the villagers, they get their fresh produce in this marketplace that sells a lot of vegetables, and I have a video later on that shows that. As for the environment, I'm going to talk about the monthly rainfall, the 30-year comparison using VDS data, and the drought years. So with the monthly rainfall, you can see that from 1975 to 1981, the monthly rainfall ranged from around 51 to roughly 60 millimeters of rain, while in 2005 to 2008, it was roughly around 60 millimeters of rain. And the thing about its environment of Dokur, the economy is very, very focused on agriculture. And as we all know, if there's a lack of rain, then there's droughts that occur. And if there's droughts, a lot of people don't have access to money. And if they don't have access to money, then it leads to problems. It leads to them to migrate out of the villages to find more jobs. And there's a huge correlation between droughts and migration, and that can be seen through a study of Dokur. And here's a village comparison from 1975 and 2007. It's a roughly 30-year comparison. And this just shows that the cultivated area increased and the dry area also increased. But however, the dry area decreased in those 30 years. And that just shows the impacts of droughts and how a lot of these farmers are unable to have clearly irrigated land for their crops. And a lot of them farm paddy, which requires a lot of water. And because that's the case, a lot of them suffer from the droughts, which is another like overarching theme of my entire seminar. And here are just the major drought years that have affected the villagers from 1972 and 2005. And throughout these years, you can see a big relationship with when the droughts happened, a lot of them would migrate out of the village to go to the cities and find work. And if you see this photo, this is a very clear example of like the impacts of droughts. Here is a very cultivated land of paddy crops where a lot of people transplant, and here's just very fallow land that no one can even use because of the lack of access to water. And the main irrigation that the Dokur villagers have are wells, bore wells, and tanks. But because there's not enough rain, these sources of irrigation are not getting fed. They're not having more water. Therefore, these are the clear results of the droughts. And as for village leadership, the Gram Panchayat is the local village government that's led by the Sarpanch. And one quick story, the Sarpanch of the village is supposed to be a woman, but however, this is actually the guy that I interviewed. He's the Sarpanch, but his wife is supposed to be the Sarpanch, but he's acting on her behalf because more people kind of respect the men in the village. Therefore, he's making more of the rules and how to enforce the rules. And the Gram Sangam is kind of like the government for the self-help group leaders. And it's composed of 3 members that have self-help group background, and at least one of them has to be from the scheduled caste. So now, since my project is about self-help groups, let me just give a brief overview on what these groups are and how they form. this is a timeline of the self-help groups in Dokor. But before I elaborate on this timeline, I want to give some brief overview about microfinance. So in 1983, Muhammad Yunus, the father of microfinance, he instituted Grameen Bank, which practiced microfinance in Bangladesh. And Bangladesh is actually one of the few countries that have ever achieved the Millennium Development Goals because of this practice of microfinance. And as many of you might know, microfinance is the provision of small and tiny loans to poor people. And the shocking thing about microfinance is that it bridges the gap between poor people and the banks. As the common stereotype between poor people are that they're unbankable, they're untrustworthy and uneducated. Therefore, they're not going to be able to pay back these monthly loans. But because of Muhammad Yunus and the belief that poor people can actually be empowered through these loans and savings, then that mentality that poor people can't have access, can build credit, slowly is declining. And here's the timeline in Dokor. In 1989, a group of women went to a place called Pilala Mari, and they learned about group savings. So from 1989 to 1998, that's a roughly 9 to 10 year period, they saved 10 rupees per month. And because they saved 10 rupees per month, a lot of the women also learned the impacts of savings. And then when by 1998, these groups actually formed, and that means that 10 to 15 members came together and they have a link with the local banks. So now that these groups are formed in 1998, many of the banks were able to give them the loans. And the mentality of having women be able to build credit is like a strong presence in Dokor. And the difference between senior groups and junior groups is that senior groups just have more experience. They formed before the junior groups, and the junior groups have only existed for roughly 8+ years. And then by 2011, there's this scam that happened, which I'll talk about in a few. And then by 2015, now there are 29 active groups. So what exactly are these groups? Well, it's broken up from senior groups, junior groups, and one physically challenged group. And the main takeaway from this graph is that this figure is that senior groups only have FC and BC leaders. When these groups formed in 1998, it was only the forward cast members that created the group, forward cast and some backward cast members. And the cast hierarchy goes from forward cast, backward cast, and scheduled cast, and just like scheduled tribe 2. But in the focus of this seminar, it's FC, BC, and SC. And again, the senior groups were only formed by the FC and BC members, while the junior groups had a combination of all castes. And again, junior groups happened 8 years after the senior groups formed. So let's just briefly elaborate on what these rules encompass. Here I split it up into government rules and self-help group rules. These rules are created by the members themselves, and these government rules are put into place that every group, not just in the village but in the entire country, have to follow. And I highlighted some rules. This one, as I mentioned, at least one of the 3 members of the Gram Sangam has to be an SC member. And the key thing about that is by having SC members in these leadership positions, it's breaking down that mentality of caste hierarchy. Again, before SC members were not able to be in these leadership positions, but because they're getting these opportunities to be in leadership positions, more people are thinking that, oh, SC people are also just like FC people or BC people. The only difference is our caste, but yeah, SC is again scheduled caste, BC is backward caste, FC is forward caste. And a group rule is that there has to be at least 10 members, but no more than 15 members. And a new government rule also said that the leaders of the self-help groups, there's 2 leaders for each group, and they have to change every 2 years. And there's this rule that one of the leaders told me. They said that in their group, they have every member rotate to go to the banks to pay the fees or to deliver the fees. And the great thing about that is it's exposing them to the whole bank system. And another key thing is that some leaders enforce late penalty fees to ensure that they all pay at the correct time. Here's just a photo of how these women organize their meetings and their loans. So here's the numbers are here. It's very hard to see, but it just shows how each member gave 100 rupees for the month. And this is the savings and bank book that they use. And here's a group photo that shows all of them. It's a really nice photo. And as for the benefits, a lot of people think that the benefits are only loans and savings, but there's actually two more. There's the insurance policy and the physically challenged benefit. So as for the loans, a group takes X amount of money from the bank. It usually starts off fairly low, like 50,000 rupees, and each month a group member pays a certain amount, and the group usually pays off the bank loan in 2 years or 3 years in that span. And while they're paying the monthly fees, they also have to pay an interest rate. But the key thing is the interest rate is so low. It's like 1.10 rupees for every 100 rupees. So an interest rate of like basically 1%. And so that's for the loans. And then the savings is that the group savings, it depends. The SHG group savings depends on every group. For example, one group can choose to have all their members save 50 rupees per month. And that money, that pot of money can only be accessed after 6 months from anyone in the group. So they have to pay back the loan and the interest rate afterwards. Then there's the Gram Sangam savings, which all the groups from the village, they pay the Gram Sangam 165 rupees, and in 6 months, any self-help group member or leader can access that money, but they have to pay back the loan and the interest rate. So now here's the two very interesting other benefits of self-help groups. The insurance policy, which consists of children's scholarship and life insurance. The children's scholarship, basically every member has to pay on yearly, this is yearly, 365 rupees. And if they do that, the bank would give their children scholarships, and that scholarships can only be accessed if the children's from 9th to 12th grades. But the family would get $1,200 per year from the bank. Rupees, not dollars, rupees, sorry. And then life insurance, right? So if anyone expires from the group, they can receive roughly 25 to 30,000 rupees, and 5,000 of that has to be allocated for the funeral and the rest for family expenditures. As for pension, this is actually, it builds more, it develops more if the member is younger, but basically if they give 365 rupees to the bank each year, they're able to get money every year from the bank. And even, yes, and then for physically challenged, the pension, I didn't know a lot of this information because I wasn't really able to interview anyone that was physically challenged, but this benefit exists. This loan history just basically shows that the senior groups, when they started in 1998, they were only able to get 30,000 rupees, but now because they were able to build credit and confidence and show the banks that they can actually pay back the loans, their amount of loans that they got increased. And same with the junior groups. Okay, so now with all of that literature review, background information, I'm going to talk about my methodology and my results section. So again, the village that I chose to study for 3.5 days was Dokur because one, it's a VLS village with a lot of data from ECRSAT. It's fairly close to the research center, and my two translators have done a lot of research in that area as well. And as for my sample, I conducted 16 interviews and 2 focus group discussions. In this section, these 4 people, the 3 male leaders in the Gram Sangam, they are key informants that made my knowledge of self-help groups more. And for these 12 self-help group leaders, these are the ones that the responses from them are the ones that I got for my results. And how I chose them was kind of random, but I took into consideration their caste structures, if they're from FC, BC, or SC, and their status as leaders, meaning if they're from senior groups or junior groups. And as for the caste structure, of the 12 leaders that I interviewed, half of them, so 6 of the respondents, were from backward caste, and 3 of them were from forward caste and scheduled caste. And the reason why there's more backward caste members are that in junior groups, almost like all of them are from backward caste. Are from backward caste. And as for my focus group discussions, I followed the SAGE and VDSA publication methodologies of only having roughly 8 to 15 people, and we conducted the interviews in one of the leaders' houses. So with such like a comprehensive village plan, I also had a very comprehensive research tool, and it varied from these 4 types of people: the active, inactive leaders, the Sarpanch, the Gram Sangam, and the focus group discussions. And these snapshot of the my tool are all focused for the active and inactive leaders. These ones, all their names are here, and these 8, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 different factors just gave more information on who these leaders are. And I thought that I could have kind of like conclusions regarding these types of relationships, but because I had such a limited sample, there were no concrete solutions that I could make based on these background information. Then I asked them about household demographics, like how many children do you have, and do you use some of your loans to pay for these children, just to get an idea of like what exactly do these women use their loans for. And afterwards, I had a more qualitative analysis asking them about their personal and leadership background. So I kind of prepared a short video of like how my experience was, just to give you an understanding of what the village is and who these people are behind the data.
Cause you're a sky full of stars. I'm gonna give you my heart. Cause you're a sky full of stars. Cause you light up the park. I don't care, go on and tear me apart. I don't care if you do. Cause in the sky full of stars, I think I saw you. Cause you're a sky full of stars. I wanna die in your arms.
Isn't it harder for groups to get the loans?
ఏమంటే తప్పు గ్రూపులు తప్పు ఉన్నాయి. మీరు లోన్లు తెచ్చుకున్నారు, ఈజీగా తెచ్చుకున్నారు. ఇప్పుడు గ్రూపులు ఎక్కువైనాయి కదా, లోన్లు తెచ్చుకోవడానికి ఏమైనా ఇబ్బంది ఉందా?
ఏమి ఇబ్బందులు?
నో.
మేమే పోతాం హలో.
I don't care, go on and tear me apart.
What do you think are the responsibilities and roles of the members?
సో ఇప్పుడు మీ గ్రూప్లో ఇప్పుడు మీ అనే కాదు అన్ని గ్రూప్లలో ఉండాలంటే ఏం ఉండాలి వాళ్ళ గ్రూప్? సపోజ్ నేను ఒకటి పెళ్ళయి ఉండాలి, ఇంకా అట్లా ఇంకేమేమి ఉంటాయి?
ఇందులో ఏమున్నారు కానీ ఇప్పుడు పెళ్లి కానాలి ఎవరు లేరు ఎవరు మెచ్చుకోలేమా ఆడపిల్లలు అవుతున్నారు ఇట్లా ఎవరు లేరు
If SHGs has made you more aware of your savings and spending.
మీకు ఇప్పుడు ఈ పొదుపు సంఘాలలో మీకు ఎంత డబ్బులు వస్తున్నాయి, మీరు ఎంత పొదుపు చేస్తున్నారు అని మొత్తం మీకు తెలుసు కదా. ఎంతమంది తెలుసు చేయలేము.
1, 2. Okay. So yes, that was my 3.5 days in the village in one short video, and I hope that gives all of you a more understanding of who these people are and what the data that I will explain truly means. Let's get to the fun part, my results section. So let me just give a brief background information about these leaders. In here, you can see that there are no junior group leaders from the forward cast or any senior group leaders from the scheduled cast. The reason for that again is that when senior groups formed, it was only forward cast members and backward cast members. As for the age range, most of the women that interviewed were 30 to 40-year-old women. Educational level, this is a very interesting graph. As you can see, the biggest one in here is that a lot of them did not have any educational level. The reason behind that is education is not a requirement to join or create self-help groups, but instead education helps groups but does not define the groups. That's one key thing to keep in mind. As for primary occupations, because DOCOR is again an environmental, it's focused on agriculture. A lot of them work for the agricultural sectors. And land holdings, since a lot of them work for the agricultural sectors, a lot of them own land. And in here you can see that junior leaders, they do not own labor or large lands, but more on the small and medium lands because of their caste structures. Again, more of the junior leaders are from BC and SC backgrounds compared to the senior leaders who own all types of lands, which are more forward caste members. As for marriage, it is a requirement for the SHG village to have a married resident, and that's why all of them are married. And there's a clear correlation with if the women are the head of the household, then they can freely spend their loans, which is elaborated on later. So that's just background information of the respondents. Then there's the socioeconomic analysis of these leaders, focusing on how long they've been a leader, why they became a leader, family support, and reasons for creating the group. So again, the government rule is that a bunch of these leaders have to rotate annually and biannually. But however, in this graph, you can see that more junior group leaders are inexperienced because the groups just formed and they just started recently compared to the senior groups. But senior group leaders, there's one of them that's been a leader for 14 years, and even though it's a government rule to rotate the leaders annually, these groups that are already successful and already thriving, they're not going to rotate the leaders if the system isn't like broken. So therefore, they're just keeping the leaders as they are. First, the senior groups at least. And the reasons for becoming an SHG leader. As I mentioned, education is not a requirement. That's why you can see it right here. And if you look at the first four, the top 4 reasons, that's actually traits, personal traits, communication skills, responsibility, confidence, and patience. Great and successful leaders are formed because of the traits that they develop. And education, that develops those traits, but again, it does not define successful leaders. It's if a leader knows how to interact with their members, if a leader knows how to access and manage their financial transactions, then more of these leaders will be successful, which impacts the success of the groups. So why do these leaders create these groups, right? So there's this big ripple effect of senior groups to junior groups. Because senior groups have existed for a longer time, they've been able to inspire these junior groups that are just forming. And that's why the main reason that people create these groups are that they're encouraged by others. And all the junior leaders responded that they created the group because they were encouraged by the senior groups. So encouragement is a big deal in creating these groups. And saving money and low interest rates, those are financial reasons. And they're kind of high on the chart. Well, at least saving money is high on the chart because self-help groups have existed in Dokor for the past 15 to 20 years, so more people know the direct impacts of these groups. And last but not least, family support. 10 out of the 12 respondents shared that their family supported them, and the reason for that is the presence of the groups and how they have such positive impacts. And those that mentioned that their family didn't support them, it's because their husbands were unaware of these benefits, and usually because of skepticism and doubtfulness, it would lead to like some physical abuse examples that these women would experience, which I'll share a little story later. That's the socioeconomic analysis of the leaders. Now, let's think about what exactly makes these successful groups. I talked a lot about the leadership aspect, and I also mentioned how the age, educational level, primary occupation, landholding, marriage status does not have any clear relationship with successful groups. And the reason for that is I had a very limited sample. Therefore, I wasn't really able to make clear conclusions. But again, successful leaders are determined by their ambition, motivation, communication skills, confidence, and patience. And those are traits that anyone can develop. Therefore, anyone can be a successful leader. And here's an example of how leadership has a ripple effect. As I mentioned, any group, any leader can develop these qualities. And if they develop these qualities, then it impacts the group because they're influenced by the qualities of the leaders, and therefore there's a stronger group dynamic. And a quick example is this woman. She shared to me her story of creating a group. She's a senior leader from a backward caste background, and she told me that before creating the group, her husband did not support it at all. And since she's a senior leader, it was when the groups were just starting to form. And because her husband did not support it or knew the benefits, her husband would physically abuse her. And but she knew that if she stays in this self-help group and maintains it, she'll have more income-generated activities. And even though she was physically abused and her husband left her, she still stayed in the group. And because of that empowerment that she had from the very start, it told me that her members from her group believed in her and had faith in her. And that's why she's still a successful group to this day. And this is just a graph of what makes a successful group regarding the responses from the respondents. And the first 5 responses are actually a form of collaborative action. And as you can see, strong group dynamics, I think, is the foundation of the entire thing. In order to have strong group dynamics, there has to be a strong enforcement of the rules in the beginning so that everyone's aware of what self-help groups are and what they need to do and what their responsibilities are. And if the rules are enforced, then more people would most likely go to these meetings and participate in the meetings. And if those two things are strong in the group, then more people would pay the monthly fees, as you can see in here. And if people pay the monthly fees, then there's a sense of unity in the groups. Therefore, there won't be any fightings. So if you put all those 5 things, they're pretty much interconnected with each other. And in 2 words, it's just collaborative action. And that's what makes successful groups. Since the previous graph is very quantitative, or since it's a bar graph, I wanted to just show some qualitative analysis on what the focus group respondents mentioned of what makes a successful self-help group an unsuccessful self-help group. And these are the responses from the active groups that are still present in Dokor. And the inactive groups, these are the responses, and I highlighted the ones that are similar that they both mentioned. So good communication, very big thing, having successful groups, active participation in the meetings that can be supported through strong group dynamics, SHGs having as a support system, so not just talking about the loans, but also talking about personal problems and helping each other out in that sense. And before I talk about the unsuccessful ones, one really interesting story is that when I had the focus group discussion for the inactive groups, a lot of them had more to tell regarding the what makes an unsuccessful group. And that kind of makes sense because they're no longer present and they're no longer in groups. But regardless, the key thing that they said is just not paying the money at the correct time. And because if people don't pay the money at the correct time, then that leads to group fightings, which declines in the sense of group unity, which is essential for a successful group. So in conclusion with how to form successful groups, there's a big leadership ripple effect, meaning that if a successful leader has these leadership qualities, then they'll be able to inspire these other group members. And because they're inspired by the leader, then there's stronger group dynamics. And these group dynamics can be developed through the enforcement of rules and participation in meetings. And if there's strong group dynamics, then more people would pay the monthly fees. And if more people pay the monthly fees, then there's less group fightings. Therefore, more successful groups. So that just checks off my first objective, the very most important one of this entire seminar. So now let's just run through the rest of them. Now I'll just elaborate about the group problems that the senior and junior groups face. But before I do that, I wanted to show how the droughts in DOCOR are a very big problem with the maintenance and creation of self-help groups. As I mentioned in the beginning, these droughts, since a lot of the people work for the agricultural sectors, the droughts affect them directly because they're not having any income generated activities, and they don't have any income generated activities, then they won't be able to pay back the loans. So the droughts actually lead to economic problems of the group. And I guess just like cast information, the scheduled cast members have limited opportunities to regarding employment. So when the droughts hit, especially during the summer, these scheduled cast members don't really have a lot of income generated activities. Therefore, they have to borrow more money from money lenders, which has high interest rates. So therefore, they're becoming in more poverty. They're unable to pay their monthly fees, therefore leading to more group fights in their self-help group. And as for the timeline, here is just how I asked all the leaders any problems that they face in the creation of the group, and I also asked them how they overcame it. So in the first 5 years for the senior groups, they had to face inability to pay the monthly fees, lack of trust on the leader, and educational disparity between the members. And throughout this entire timeline, every group is affected by the droughts. And as for the junior groups, they also have the same type of problems that they face in the first 5 years, but these two factors, lack of trust on the leader, educational disparity between the members, are not as predominant because they've seen how that shaped the senior groups. So when I mentioned that the senior groups affect and impact the junior groups, it's because the junior groups are able to see the examples of the senior groups of how to carry out their groups and how to make it more successful based on the examples of the senior groups. But both of them would always face the problems of members not being able to pay the monthly fees. And here's one other quick story of how these 5 groups ended. In the beginning, I mentioned the timeline of DOCOR. There's these 5 senior groups that ended. And the reason behind that is, so this is the focus group discussion. And when I asked them, oh, any problems that you face? So all of them talked about the scam. And I would ask them, auntie, like, quiet it down, because everyone was talking over each other. And I finally found out the reason for the scam was there was this one woman that took the signatures of all the group leaders, five group leaders and 5 members. And when that one woman went to the bank, she said that, oh, these members, they're taking a loan, but she actually took that loan for herself. So then after a few months or weeks and months, these 5 leaders finally paid off their bank loan, and they're like, let me get some more bank loan. So then they go to the bank, but the bank is like, you haven't been able to pay back your previous loan. And the reason for that is that woman that took their signatures caused that scam. And they not necessarily corrupted, but it's like she claimed that it was the loans for the groups, but really it was for herself. Therefore, these groups were suffered from her actions. And because of that, a lot of the groups, especially the members, did not realize the benefits of the groups and just wanted the group to end. And even though a group can have strong group dynamics or strong group participation, if scams like this happen and they're not able to overcome it, any successful group will be bound to fail, especially if there's miscommunication and mistrust rather than focusing on the benefits of the groups. So then I talked about how the interconnectedness of this problems and how that affects creation and maintenance of the groups. And I also mentioned how through this scam, even though you can have successful groups, that scams like that can cause groups to fail if they don't have, if they cannot fully cope with the problem and focus on the positives rather than the negatives. Now for the last part, I'm just going to talk about the impacts and the empowerment and exposure of these women through the groups. But before I do that, I just want to quickly show you what these women spend their loans on. Most of them spends their loans on, so as I mentioned, if they're the head of the household, they can freely spend their loans. So half of these women were able to do that. They're able to spend their loans because they're the head of the household. And I also asked them, what did you spend your SHG loans in the past 5 years? So, and most of them responded on family's education. And the key thing about this graph is that it supports NABARD study. And NABARD is just the bank that started the self-help group bank linkage program in India. So this graph definitely shows that study. And the result is if women have access to money, then they actually spend it on income-generated activities. And a lot of people might not see education as an income-generated activity, but we all have to think that education is a long-term investment. You're not going to get money right in return, but when these children realize that, oh, education is a form of empowerment and that I can actually uplift my families when I have a better job, then that in the end gives them more of an income because of their family investments on education. And then it's house improvements and agriculture. Then I asked these, just to get more of an analysis, I asked them, so do you spend any of these loans on your children? And 3/4 of them said they did. That's why children's education is the biggest one. And I thought I would find a relationship with who they spent their loans on, but because of the limited amount of sample, I did not really have any conclusions because I thought that, these women would spend more money on the education of their male children, but there's not enough data to conclude that. And I actually found out that most of the women would spend it on both of their children, specifically in Dokor. So that's just a quick information on their individual financial transactions. Now for the last part, just the impacts of it. 11 out of 12 respondents mentioned that the biggest impact was how the self-help groups positively impacted them to save money. And here are more of the responses. As you can see, saving more money is the very top one. And the reason that that's a big thing is because of the historical presence of the groups in Dokor. So more women know that I'm going to get more money because of those 4 benefits that I mentioned in the beginning. And then the rest is just gaining more connections and improvement. And these ones are actually individual impacts, meaning that, for example, the saving more money, that's that affects the entire household, while these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 other responses are on how the groups individually impacts the woman. But if you think about it, even though only one person said empower the woman, all these things indirectly and directly empower the woman. And this is one of my key findings that I found. But basically, this just shows how the participation in self-help groups, it can gain, it exposes more of a network. And I want to actually quote one of Dr. Padmaja's, her dissertation on social network. It basically says that if women are in self-help groups, then they have more of a network system, not just in their village, but outside of their village. And this graph clearly shows that finding, because a member, a leader right here, a self-help group leader, can participate in the Gram Sangam, and the Gram Sangam can go to the Mahila Mandal Sangam, which is just basically a bunch of Gram Sangam leaders from the whole mandal, and someone from that mandal can know other people from the district-wide level or even the government. So just participation in the self-help groups exposes these women to more network systems. And this is the same type of thing, but just in a cooler staircase figure. And that's basically the impacts of self-help groups. And that clears off my last objective for this seminar. So to the last part of this last remaining 2 minutes, I just want to express, if I had more time, I would have been able to interview more respondents from other villagers. That can be active and inactive group members, because I only interviewed the leaders. So it's not necessarily biased, but if I had more time, I would have also asked the members for more information regarding, oh, how was this leader like? How did this leader inspire you? And then I would have also created more case studies regarding how these groups spent their money. And I truly believe that even though there's a lot of research everywhere, the main way that it can have a direct impact is through policies and recommendations. And if permitted more time, I would have loved to do something like that. And again, compare Dokor results with another village and even analyze the VDSA data. So these are the things that I would have wanted to do if I had more time. But to conclude this entire presentation, I hope that you all thought about those two quotes in the beginning about microfinance and gender equality, because self-help groups are the perfect way of combining those interests, of seeing how women are empowered through getting these savings, and how they're not just empowered by themselves, but they make sure that they're empowered together through collaborative action. And because of collaborative action, and that's when successful groups form. And when successful groups form, then more women are able to access these impacts. With all that said, thank you so much for your time, and I hope you enjoyed my seminar. So if there's any questions?
Precious, this is quite impressive. You have continued the legacy of the World Food Prize interns who has come to ICRISAT under our guidance in the last 5 or 6 years. And I promised the audience this morning that they will be truly impressed, and I think they are. So let's open now the floor for questions and answers. Eddie.
Thanks for excellent presentation.
Thank you.
Personally, I learned a lot of things from your presentation on how to present.
I can teach you. I'm doing a little
on
seminar next week for that.
The new techniques in PowerPoint presentation. Definitely, I will use something from this. I just for clarification, 15 years back, when I was doing my master's, I was doing the same kind of work to study the impacts of SSGs. During that time, most of the SSGs are formed successful, and also the formation is basically comes from support, background support given by government organization
Yes.
or NGO kind of stuff, because they push reflects in their success.
Yes.
Did you find anything in such kind of backup in that local village for this SME formation?
Yes.
That is one question, and another one is you mentioned about the loans dispersion and then the amount of loans in the range of something from 30 to 5 lakhs. It's a group loan or it's a kind of individual loan they give?
For the first question, when I had the graph about what made them create these groups, the first one was talking about how they were encouraged by others. And those respondents not only mentioned senior leaders, but also how the local village leadership, like the Gram Panchayat and Gram Sangam, they're more they want to make sure that more women are in these groups, so they would inspire them to join self-help groups because they know the impacts, and there's and it's not just the impact level on the women but also on the village. And for the second one, that graph was about or that table was more loans on a group level, not individual. And once they get that loan, they would split it equally on each member.
I'm Arun, who actually is a part of IDC. Just wanted to ask you, notice that the amount of irrigated area from 1975 till 2000 is almost halved.
Yes.
And are there going to be any watershed interventions that's going to happen soon? Because this can indirectly help the self-help group,
Exactly.
make a bit more money.
Exactly. That's a very great point. When I went to the village, they mentioned that there's supposedly a watershed program happening next year, but I don't know what exactly that entails because they said it would be something regarding like canals and stuff, but I don't know how they would do that regarding the demographics of the area. But they're convinced that they're having a watershed movement or more of a program next year.
All relevant information. It gives me an opportunity to ask you, what would be the three do's to, if somebody wants to spread this self group in a new village, what are the three do's and three don'ts?
So just to clarify, your question is what would be those three main things that if should be done? One, the local village government should be aware of the rules and should inspire and help those people that are trying to create those groups, so that because the local village government is a link for the groups and also linked to the government. So if there's new government programs regarding self-help groups, then they can effectively communicate that information to those groups. So having a rural government that is invested in self-help groups. The second one, kind of doing somewhat of like a pilot program. I feel like you shouldn't just say, oh, let's establish self-help groups now, but you should teach women how to save loans. Because as seen in Dokor, there was a 10-year pilot program of how these women saved 10 rupees per month. And because they saved 10 rupees per month, more of the women knew the impacts of saving money and how they can use that to attain a bank loan. So kind of having a pilot program. And the third one is probably when the groups are in effect, just making sure that if the group is in the beginning, if the group members are, not having if they're having miscommunication or fightings in the beginning, just someone that would be able, actually, I think that in the beginning, there should be someone that knows how self-help groups form so that they can be served as a resource for those groups that are having problems in the beginning. Because with the junior groups in Dokor, they're able to see examples from the senior groups so that they can better their groups. So if there's a resource person like that in the village that knows about the impacts of self-help groups and how to create successful self-help groups, then there will be more groups that in the beginning they would form more successfully. And don'ts. 3 don'ts or just don'ts? Don'ts. Okay. don'ts. No scams. Don't have like a lady that just gets everyone's signatures and goes to the bank. Like make sure that make sure that when these women are going to the banks and delivering these signatures that everyone knows what they're signing, because there's again, education is not a requirement for self-help groups, but it helps the dynamics of the groups. So if everyone in the group's illiterate and don't know what they're signing, then they're easily going to be like, let's do this, let's just sign it because signing's nice. But then like if they know that they're signing for a scam, then that's obviously going to ruin their group dynamics. So just making sure that every group member is understands what they're signing for, and yes.
Alright, you said, yeah, my name is Mariah Cox. I am another Borlaug Bruin intern. I am. Hello. So you said you have no correlation between marriage, age, education, and work.
Mm.
But was there any other studies conducted with suggestive correlations?
Not that I read, because for example, I thought that successful leaders would have more land, would own more, would have like higher income, but based on like my report and analysis, those are not factors that constitute successful leaders. It's just the development of those qualities that I mentioned. But maybe there's like a relationship with if you're in a higher caste with higher money, maybe it's easier for you to develop those qualities. But as for my report and the ones that I've read, I haven't found any clear relationship or correlation. That's a great question.
Suggest that you read more literature and then maybe make that point in your report because you're still finalizing your report.
Yes.
So you can enhance it.
Yes, Alex.
So I'm Alex. I'm also an intern at IMI. And I was wondering if through your literature review or just your experience in the village, you had any indication of how the membership of these groups were formed, how these women were related, if they were existing social groups or neighbors or relatives, and if you had any idea of how pre-existing social networks interacted with scams at all.
Yes. That's a wonderful question. For the first one, when I did do my literature review and analysis on a bunch of readings, I did come across that one of kind of like an indirect reason for why these groups form are that these women have relationships with each other. They can either be from the same caste. That's how they formed in the beginning. As I mentioned in my report, the senior leaders, they were usually from forward caste backgrounds and backward caste backgrounds. They wouldn't have any SE members because of the caste disparity. So that would be one connection that they already had established, their caste structure. And a lot of these women also form groups, in my report, a lot of these women form groups with their family members, if their daughter-in-laws, or their neighbors, because rural villages consist of roughly 3,000 to 4,000 people, especially Dokor, and a lot of them would basically know each other. So because of this limited space and their population, they will have that connection with those people. And as for your second question, with the social networks, I haven't read much into that aside from Dr. Padmaja's dissertation, and um, the social networks, I haven't read on like how that can have an impact on how these groups form, but that is a form of empowerment that's seen because more of these women are. Do you want to touch more?
My experience in a neighboring village, Auripalli, like it's also in the Rupnagar district, there's proximity, like neighborhoods, they form their groups.
based on caste, and in the villages, you know, if you see the same caste households live in one particular part of the village. Yeah, the mic is on. So it's also the neighborhood effect is there. And then when forming self-help groups, other social networks to which they belong to also matters. So if I belong to a group or a network which is a network of my caste association or my occupation, then I tend to form a group, a self-help group, with some of the members who are already members of these groups that I already belong to or these networks. So yes, social networks do have an effect on forming groups. And the leaders of the social networks or some of the members who are occupying focal positions in the networks tend to emerge as leaders of these self-help groups. So there is an effect of social networks on group formation.
To give Precious an opportunity to express one last chance. Phil. This is an example of a research where Precious started with a wide area. Where she says, I'm interested in microfinance, I'm interested in gender inequality and equality. And she said, I'd like to have some more deeper understanding of this. So it was a broad area. And quickly within the first 1, 2, or 3 interactions with Padma, Kavita, and myself, she focused very, very intently on addressing a very specific question. I'd like to give an opportunity for Precious to say, what is that very specific question that you actually ended asking in a very focused way, and how you are now realizing that community-driven development can actually be established and can be realized. And that community-driven development actually involves empowered members of the community, including that of women. So this is your punchline statement.
My main question that revolve in this entire seminar project is what makes successful groups, specifically self-help groups. And how I came about with that is my very first day in ECRSAT. I was very confused on what I had to do in this internship. I didn't know where to start. So I walked in the office of Dr. Padmajan Kavita, and I had an hour interview, or not interview, just questionnaire conversation of what should I do here? And then she told me what she's been doing with social networks and how that gender is correlated with nutrition. And then she just elaborated a lot about self-help groups. And then I would do my readings, and I would always come up with that question, what makes successful groups? And then I started thinking, why is that important? The reason for why that is important is because if you have more successful groups, then more of these women will benefit from these impacts that are talked about all throughout Google and all these organizations. And as for the second one, you mentioned about community development.
Development coming out of empowered members of the community. So it's a literature that you will pursue for your future work if you have, even for your PhD, if you have continued interest in this. It's called CDD.
Okay.
Community-driven development.
And you want me to talk about that, or
how does this relate now to
my future work? In Dokor Village, it was very heartwarming to see that in every door I went, or every house that I went, all of these women welcomed me with open arms, with tea and with food. And you wouldn't really see that in places back at home. And that got me thinking, like, why is this the case? So that's a clear example of community-driven development. Just the fact that these women in households, they're more open to welcoming you to their households because they also want to like freely share their experiences, and I think that their experiences can be justified because of their exposure to self-help groups. And as I mentioned with the impacts, self-help groups, it has so many individual impacts on the empowerment of women that can range from communication skills to patience to responsibility to confidence. And when I would interview these women, they would talk in such ways that such body language that just showed that they're fierce and that they're great leaders. And I truly believe that because of these individual impacts on the women through self-help groups, then that has a ripple effect on the entire community, the entire village. And that's one big way that these individual impacts correlate with the community-driven development.
Precious, let's just congratulate Precious for a job well done. And now, which means that after this immersions and very consistent research, she'll now have to incorporate all the comments and write her report and submit it in time before she leaves.